in 1975, Mark, on the psyops, that's your picture of a nude in Florida on the beach. Wasn't it? It's called Nude on a Florida Beach,
Yeah.
1975.
Mm. Yeah.
So was that one of your first? Was that one of your first paintings?
No, I
Because
did
you
many.
don't look 90.
Well, at 75 doesn't make. Yeah, I mean, I was young. That was done when I was, let me think now, 17. And
Yeah.
and basically I went to university after high school, into what was called qualifying year, which is like doing your last year of high school, but doing it in university.
Yeah.
And in the first month or so, I realized I wasn't going to follow through. So I withdrew from all my courses and I went to a, a fine arts school at Algonquin College. But I had a history of painting. You know, for example, if you look here, that's a portrait I did of my father around the same time. And
Mm.
that was a gift I did to him for his work in Vietnam when he was the first chairman of the ICCS, which is International Commission for Control and Supervision. And if we get buddy, I'll tell you one incredibly gut wrenching story that hasn't come to light. But I had it. He told me about it, but that I had it confirmed at his funeral by one of his colleagues who was with him in Vietnam. But but that's a different. I digress. But I think the issue was that I was good at it and all that, but then I realized that somehow I got obsessed with wanting to be a musician, and so I ended up working at music. And only later that I got into science as a reaction to economists telling me that I didn't understand, and that my logic, although apparently good, lacked the technical ability. So I said I'm going to get a degree in science. So I did applied math, biology, and systems. And people asked me, said, why don't you study economics? And I said no, because I noticed in my first year of science that everyone, like 70% of people failed calculus and algebra because it's like a eliminatory subject that you do in the first year. And out of the people who failed, the vast majority went to economics. So I just got by with a pass, and I actually repeated the first year calculus because I didn't want to go on without a greater mastery. So it was a half-year course. I did that. So I just ended up doing that as an exercise to develop myself. It wasn't out of an act of love or passion. But I basically got the basic skills to do analysis because with computer systems and programming, which I was doing in my course integrated science, using biology as a general field in which you would apply analysis and then computer modeling. And my final project for my degree was a computer model of the dynamics of Peromyscus leucopus, which is a wood mouse,
Mm.
a woodland mouse that was being, its habitat being completely deformed by farmland. So finding out how they behaved and reacted to that. So I got that under my belt. And then I had the problem of having to survive. And I had invested, a lot of energy in this. So I ended up working in IT. And that just went on until recently. So,
I wanted to ask you from that whole story, that whole
mhm.
what you just said, Mark. In your in the forward, you say in 1982 you met John Turmel or Turmel. I don't know how you
Yeah,
pronounce that.
Termel, yes.
Turmel, but John introduced you to the money problems. Is this when something sparked in you, and that
Yeah,
began your
that's
journey
right.
into I need to understand this?
Yeah, well, basically, I knew John before he got involved in the money issue at Carleton University in my first try at university where I said I backed out, and John was known for being the engineering student that was paying his way through school by gambling, and he was quite a character. and his final year, his degree project was basically a card counting system that he developed on a computerized card counting system, and that he actually exploited to the point of being expelled from Vegas and all that. So he has that story is legitimate about John. But he basically was on a campaign to try and legalize his version of gambling, where he would allow that it was a dispute about the real meaning of the gaming laws in Canada, and he thought that he had found a loophole around them by giving the same advantage to the players. In other words, he would allow any player to be the house against him, so that there wasn't a disadvantage between house, so they could choose, right? They had the choice to do that. So he was on that campaign, and then people would ask him politically. So he ran for that because he got busted a couple of times. And then they asked him about the economic problem. And so he immediately framed it in what was familiar to him, which was, he says, well, computer chips, poker chips or casino chips don't have interest. And so therefore they don't inflate. And that was basically the basis of his analysis. And then he basically took the idea that interest was an exponential, and therefore, by definition, any exponential in the system is unstable, and therefore you have an unstable system. And so I met him afterwards. I was studying classical guitar in Spain, and then I came and met him. He met his brother, and then I hooked up, having known him before he got into the money thing. And I knew his character and his personality, and so I knew he was kind of legit. He wasn't a scam artist or anything. And he told me the money problem, and I immediately caught on to it for whatever reason, and started asking people at the Bank of Canada, etc., pugnant questions, very simple questions like, is the interest portion of our debts part of the monetary mass? Yes or no. It either is or isn't, right? And I never got a straight answer. And I got a lot of highfalutin mathematical analysis that didn't convince me, which is what prompted me to get a degree in science, so that I would have the ability to answer all of these things. And then I ran in politics twice. I became Canada's most arrested candidate. At that point, I don't know if I'm still am or not, but anyway, and that's 1982, 1984. I realized that, this was going nowhere. There was getting no popular support, although I did get considerable support. I mean, but not for my antics, or not antics, but my bid for being represented equally as a legitimate candidate, which was the issue that was that I basically got arrested for, because I insisted on my right to participate and not allow the media to decide whether or not I was going to participate in these nonpartisan debates. So anyway, that thing, basically that whole experience taught me several things. And to summarize it, that basically the response to what I was doing and saying was very organized in terms of how the judicial system interacted with the police and interacted with the media. It was very, very biased. And I won my case, the important case, which was the first one, which had, real jail time, a penal case. And so I had, to go to jail if I lost. And I won that, because of a set of circumstances, and because nobody wanted the embarrassment of jailing a legitimate candidate because he just wanted to participate in a debate.
Yeah. Were you standing on a platform of money's misrepresentation?
Yeah, basically related to it, but not money's misrepresentation as we're saying it today. I was standing on the platform of, government being able to finance without having to borrow money from banks. So if a mayor, which I was running for mayor of Ottawa, if a mayor can sign a debenture promising to pay the bank 120% at that time, which was an issue. We had 20% interest rates, which was astounding in Canada. And then he can sign a debenture for, like for $1 million. He signs to the bank a debenture for $1 million. Then he can sign $1,001 debentures to workers and pay them directly and save the 20% interest. And then the businesses in town would be able to accept them because they could use those notes or debentures, whatever, to pay their taxes with. So it was a way to get, to give more financial control to the local economy and the local administration. So that was basically the stance I had, and it was sort of colored by John Trammell, because John Trammell had the same platform, and he was responsible for a lot of the initial ideas with regard to what to do, and so we had a very confrontational and belligerent attitude to the world, and etc. And I had several problems with it, because I felt that this wasn't going anywhere, and I didn't really believe that the people were all that bad. The people were just habituated to the system as it was, and were surprised by it. And we didn't take the time to explain things to people well, and we were basically using our trump cards willy-nilly, because we were smarter than everyone else, and that wasn't a very healthy approach in my view. So I realized it was going anywhere, and so I dedicated. The key point is that in 1990, when I finished my degree in science, or soon after, I wrote a piece called Protocols for Sane Economic Exchange, and that's where I got the idea, and I got obsessed with the concept of money as a measure. And so I started working on that idea in a kind of preliminary way. And any kind of measure involves standards. And I talked about standards then with no knowledge of what was going to happen in my future. And that in 2003, I would be assigned to represent the authors communities in the MPEG community, which is an international standards body of ISO group, and to work on standards in terms of author rights, etc. And so there I learned the whole method, if you will, of MPEG standards development, etc., and how and I actually got a standard through with a lot of opposition from different stakeholders. And so at that point, the 2008 crisis came, and a lot of the work that I was doing when those standards became really relevant to defining data and how to define data and the science of defining data. And I realized about money's misrepresentation. And that's how I got into that. And anyway, long story.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Yeah, that was the media value chain ontology. I'm reading that now. That's the ISO.
That's right.
Published in 2010. So
and
can I now
ratified twice now?
Twice. Okay.
So it's still ongoing.
Liam, how did you get involved in thinking about money and its representation or misrepresentation?
Well, I think through the Culture Bank project, I read that standard and that the work that Mark had done on that. And so yeah, I think initially Mark became somebody who was interesting to me on that basis. And then we obviously immediately, having made contacts, and I don't remember how that happened. I think we probably contacted each other via social media somehow. We entered into a very long conversation. I was writing the book, Share, and I wanted to interview Mark. And we had sort of preliminary debates. And here's the thing that struck me about Mark, and we still have debates, and we sometimes tear strips off each other, and we could probably do well not to. But what really interested me was that there was no kind of proprietary, having got to the nub of what Mark has been saying about money's misrepresentation, and I did my research and went into the MSTA files, and I asked the questions that you're asking now. And Mark and I have talked quite a lot. We've had extensive conversations, and we've gone into some detail. And but the sort of catalyst that made me think there's something really interesting happening here was at the point of me getting it. So when I got a sort of level of understanding that I could see what Mark was talking about, I realized it's not his, and Mark will say the same thing. You know, this is just basic. This is systems science applied to a money system. But what I really liked about Mark was I turned a corner. You know, I had a lot of issues because this is a profound change in a system that affects everybody on the planet, and that's, you know, it's a big thing to talk about, and it's almost kind of comedic. You almost think, hang on, you know, who am I to be having this? You know, who's going to listen to me? What I found really interesting was that I passed a point in time where I got it. And I turned around to Mark then and I said, well, and I'm sure other people do say this, and it's a sort of it's a kind of resistance to the idea, or you know, to the information, if you like. There's an, oh, what can I do about it? And what are you doing about it? You know, there's a sort of so what moment where you say, okay, I get all this, you know, but so what? And Mark just said, well, you know, I thought you might do so. I thought you were going to do something about it yourself. And I thought that was really interesting because he didn't waste time arguing with me about how useful his methods were or why we should go this way or that way or telling me how to do it. He just said, well, now you know. And I thought that's actually the most powerful kind of an approach to something which, you know, I mean, I've come to realize that I had a lot of social, political agendas. I've had issues with, I had a similar case that went to the High Court in a different area, but I had some similar experiences to Mark. And I realized actually that it's that Captain Kirk thing. If you want to change things, you have to be aware of the power structures that you're working in and the systems that you're working in. And the thing about this is almost all power is constructed, if not by, you know, using money. The money system is implicated in almost everything. And so there's a kind of fundamental requirement to address that if it is a problem. And evidently it is a problem. So you know, so really now and I hope you will be asking yourself the same question. I'm although we have disagreements, I am just asking myself that question that Mark asked me, you know, when I finally basically understood. I mean, there's levels of understanding. What am I going to do about it? You know, and that's where I'm at. That's what we're doing this right now.
As you were speaking and sharing that, I think one of the most interesting things for me personally, and I'll speak a bit about my life, Mark, and why I'm sitting here talking to you guys, is I'm going to attempt to document my journey through this, like from now, you know, from first meeting it, and because I think I've been so involved with systems change and for a long time through my mentor. So I'll tell my story briefly. I was basically triggered by between 18 and 25, I was a total mess. I left the safe construct of school. Suddenly you're thrown out and told, here, go university, go make money, go do jobs. And I just didn't have the mental structure for that. I didn't have the ego, the identity, nothing. So I said, I don't know anything. So I went and traveled, and eventually I was in Australia and I met Jiddu Krishnamurti's work. And I was reading I remember Fremantle in Perth. I opened this book, which had the spine said, you are the world. And in it, somewhere, it said, given all the violence, the pain, the war, the suffering, the injustice, what are you going to do about it? And it was just such a simple question that directly at me, and I went, well, what am I going to do about it? And that kind of fire in the belly started, that was when I was 21, 22. I'm now 51. And although I was told by many that that would dissipate and I would give up and just live a normal life, whatever that is, and be a nice boy and just do what I'm told, that never happened. And so I've struggled for 30 years to find the answer to that question. And I thought I'd found it working with my friend Chris, a friend and mentor. So I met Chris in 2005 in Edinburgh, and Chris at that time had just completed a phase where, first of all, he was responsible as chairman of the Committee for Alternative Medicines in late 90s. He got through the legal structures for alternative medicine in the UK, because prior to that there wasn't any. And also psychotherapy. It was a real mess that time. It was like, what can we agree on? So he was very good at that. And then he was headhunted to be one of the three men who oversaw the devolution of Scotland from the UK, which was not only inspiring as a story, but all the things that he learned in that process and shared with me regarding power and how it actually works. You know, I'll just share this now. I'll never forget his talking about so Malcolm Rifkin was the first minister of Scotland, and you had, I think it was David Cameron, or maybe it was John Major. I forget who it was, but Rifkin saying, so we want to be independent. We want to be a sort of devolved parliament. What do we do? How do we do this? And then one of the three men said, what do you want? And he says, well, we want education. We want the kind of police, we want the Home Office. All right, we'll just phone him up and say, I want that. So he phoned him up and said, we want this. He said, right, fine. And it was done in a phone call. And then it was all the civil servants went and sorted out the rest. But the actual decisions were, what do you want? I want this. Okay, fine, done. The Hong Kong leaving UK, going back to China, that was all done over a dinner with two men. Lots of beer and lots of food. That was it. Two men just deciding. And I realized that when it comes to huge systemic changes, they're often just decided by a very small group of people. So why can't that be we the people? Why does it have to be this process that we're stuck in? So I got really interested in all these things. I was really working with Chris until he died 4 years ago. And now he was focusing on consciousness and our actual capacity to wake up and listen and change. So you can become conscious of something, but then intelligence is, what do you do about it? And most people lack the doing bit because it's too hard. It requires behavioral change. It requires lots of internal shifts. And so for me, since I have met Money Systems and read it, and I've read it, and I've read it, I've talked with him a bit, not hugely. I think we just had one call. But it now brings up a lot of the things I've learned over the years and a lot of the struggles that people have. The first one I'd name is to do with something that's so vital to us, like money. It's a bit like we've gone from the teat to money has become the thing that we say. We need this. It feeds us. It nourishes us. That somehow talking about money triggers something in the brain for people. They become nervous. They become, what does this mean to me? What does this mean that I won't get a pension? Does this mean that? They come up with all sorts of their private fears about this thing that allows them to survive. So that the amygdala kind of shuts down. It's the same with climate change. A lot of people can't deal with any kind of facts about what's happening to our planet. So there's that bit which I'm interested in overcoming. Then there's the storytelling. So I've been trained in storytelling. I love story as the medium of how we share our learning over centuries. I've been with Native people, First Nations people in Michigan near Sault Ste. Marie. I spent a lot of time with them. I've met Lakota. I've sat with them. And for me, being around them and knowing the history, they got on just fine without any kind of money systems as we have now. They were just a very strong people, built culture, did things, got things done, evolved, whatever. And so that for me shows that it's possible. And then the other thing with Chris and another friend I have who are obsessed with agreements. You know, it's just basically what can we agree on? What can we agree this is, and what do we do about it? And then we stick to those agreements. And then what happens if we don't stick? It's basic common sense. And a part of this is bringing these things, these challenges like agreements, like politics, like money, like thinking, making this exciting again, making that everyone's actually interested and not just sitting on the couch watching Netflix. it's like, listen, folks, this is important. Let's get back to those Greek days where there was a forum and everyone went there and chatted and discussed and debated and tried to understand what is going on. And so to be involved in these kind of dialogues, and also to, the justice element, what is right. So I'm going through that very initial process of the listening and an understanding, Mark and Liam. That's where I'm at. So I'll pause there, and if either of you want to share or say something, and then maybe I can offer an idea.
Okay, well, that is basically the story of someone who's concerned about what's going on and is not willing to adapt to the status quo to get by, but willing to do something. And the question is, what do we do and how do we do that? And I think one of the most outstanding aspects of our work is that there are a lot of basic concepts that you learn in systems theory, that the basic fundamental systems theory that a lot of people just don't know, and if you don't know these things, you can get really lost. And one of the concepts that I think is kind of important, and in one of my earlier writings I pointed out, and that is that so when you talk about a system, you're talking about a definition. You're not talking about a physical reality. You're talking about a definition, a representation of that can or cannot, to some or other degree, coincide with a physical reality. So the more phenomenological reality, if you will, the more it coincides, then the more useful that model is, right? So we can think about all of the different gadgets and things that we use. We're applying that philosophy, right? So when we build a motor, when we build anything that works according to specification over a period of time, it's because our model is correct, and that's why we get the expected results. So
Mark, you wouldn't apply that to natural. I mean, there are natural systems.
No. Natural systems have the same idea. You can identify, for example, the Krebs cycle, or you can identify the basic components and systemics of DNA transcription. So those are systems, and you can model those in a way that is pretty much one-to-one to what's happening in the physical reality. There's consistency. There's a constant change at the fundamental level. But the point I'm trying to say is that when you talk about a system, you're talking about basically a model of a system, right? So in other words, if you have a physical reality and that physical reality changes so that the model no longer applies, then that physical reality has to have a new representation because something has changed. Some new components come in, some new behaviors happen, some new connections, some new whatever, right? So one of the problems that people have is knowing the difference between those two things, right? So in the case of the money system, it's so elementary and so simple as a system in terms of its mechanics that it doesn't really change in its essence. So it's a very easy system to model. And you can identify the key aspects of it that determine its nature, right? So if you have a system design, which is an arbitrary one, because human beings have generated money, it's not something that came out of nature, which is a more complicated and more difficult thing to deal with, but a human-made system, right? Then you say, okay, well, what's the purpose of the system? We invented it, so we must know what the purpose is. So how do we define it, define its components, and define it so that we can really understand it in common and use it in common? So none of that definition has ever taken place because in economics, et cetera, they've basically assumed that money is like some kind of natural constant or something that exists in spite of us, and we just have to deal with its nature, although we don't know what its nature is, which is bollocks, because we invented the damn thing. So it's not something that we...
Is that a technical systems term?
Bollocks? No. Anyway, it's incumbent on us to define things properly, to use it, let's say, to use it honestly, transparently, in a way that makes sense. And so by having no formal definition, people are lost. Yet there is a system operating because there is a common notion of money that everybody's pretty much agreed to without really understanding. And that's where money's misrepresentation comes in. So we have a notion of money that seems on a superficial level to make kind of sense, right? That money is both a measure and an object that we trade in the market, right? And that's how it evolved, and that's just the way it is, right? But if we analyze that formally from the perspective of someone who says, okay, I'm going to build a money system for some purpose, right? You have to always start with some kind of problem statement or purpose, right? Then you would find that we can't use that definition because it's, it's ontologically inconsistent, right? Because the properties of an article of trade, goods or services, right, are not don't coincide with the properties of measure or record or measure, right? So they're mutually exclusive concepts, right? So mixing up together is a non-ontological error, and in fact, in computer science, we have a very well-established understanding of this problem in object-oriented programming, which is called multiple inheritance.
If I wanted to try and simplify that for any audience, could I say something like you can't trade centimeters for different values?
Yeah, that's the net result, that we have this problem. But anyway, I'm getting away with myself. Let me just say that we can discuss the misrepresentation later. But the point is that this common notion we have is a misrepresentation. So we have what we would a sort of anomalous kind of system, but the fact that misrepresentation still has predictable, measurable system consequences. And the most fundamental consequence is the fact that if money is a measure of value and also an article subject to the measure of value, then you have that circularity. And that's where you get this idea of interest on money, where money is the measure of value, but at the same time, it's the article of trade that we measure its value in terms of itself in varying units of itself, which makes no sense. So which
is actually a definition of instability. Is that, that's instability built into a system.
That's right. It builds because you have a feedback loop. It creates the criteria, the sort of colloquial understood criteria for positive feedback, which is basically a geometric progression, which is instability, right? So the problem with money's misrepresentation, or what we're trying to say to make the argument or discussion or the dispute clear and easy, is to say, first of all, you guys haven't done your homework talking to the experts, right? You haven't defined the system that wasn't given to you by God or nature. It's something that's been generated by mankind. You call yourselves experts. Well, it's incumbent on you to define it in a way so we can all understand. And you haven't. So you've shrugged that and said, no, I'm not going to, they can't be done, whatever. That's the usual, can't be done, can't be done. Well, maybe it can't be done because you haven't studied systems, but it can be done. And we're showing you how it can be done. So then the other question is that you haven't defined, you haven't done that. But then we have this common notion, which is built into contracts, right? And it's evident in all of these money contracts and mortgages and most of the things that involve money as the key asset, if you will. Those contracts assume that money is both an article of trade and a measure of value. And that is logically inconsistent. And we have a formal, very simple formal proof that for people who are not mathematically oriented, I can understand it's difficult, but it's not that difficult, and it can be done by anyone if you just follow it step by step and you see it. It's very short, and basically we show that if something is a record of value, right, then as a record of value, it can't be given a value of its own, because a record is always of something else, right? So it's a record of value of something else. So you can't give that record of value a value on its own. in a transaction, because then you don't have, you're basically computing two things. You're computing the value it represents plus the value it has, which doesn't now coincide with the value that it represents. So it's a very simple proof, and it pretty much stumps. And the other big problem we have is that at the highest levels of economics and finance, you have people that are literally mathematically and systems or scientifically and a systems level illiterate. So they're theorists about economics and money, but they have no understanding, or they don't have the tools to understand what we're talking about. They don't even have the basics.
Do you think it's anything to do with economics? I talked to Michelle Bounds about this and a couple of other people, and that their take, not exactly on this, but on economics, is that economics functions mainly as a sort of human system, when in actual fact, a system based on numbers and resources is a finite and physical science, you know. So this it's not a human science, it's a physical science, and is part of the problem. I mean, I think it is part of the problem, isn't it? That there's an assumption that, as you say, the money system just is.
Well, yeah, no, yeah, no. I think the problem lies in the fact that we are. I mean, if you want to talk about economics as sort of a social thing, where we have no pretense of calculating or imposing or enforcing rules mathematically, then that's fine. We can talk about how we feel about things and what we value and what we don't value, you know. But the moment you start using the way they're using numbers and money with, you know, high-powered econometrics that are, you know, that are used in as tools and algorithms to, you know, dominate the markets and everything else, you know, and their whole study of the relationship of the economic data, the dollar sign data.
Can we use a scientific word like calibrate rather than dominate? You think that would sound
yeah, they could be calibrate. It could be calibrate, but the basic idea is that they're you know, the IMF, the OECD, the World Bank, all these guys are just pumping up all these numbers. And the power of our approach is to say, it's very simple. And that's to say, this is incredibly pretentious because you're doing all these calculations in a unit. Can you please give me the formal definition of the unit? And they don't have that. So what they're doing, the only way that kind of dynamic can sort of exist is because of circularity, which is basically you create this money system based on the dollar, right? And you don't define the dollar, then you create all these, you start measuring things happening with the dollar, with relation to the real world. And then you say that somehow that has to do with the real world, and it doesn't. It has nothing to do with the real world because you have no nexus in your definition of the unit with the real world. So what basically they're saying, which goes back to the economic idea, or the idea that economics is a human thing, is they're saying, well, basically they're creating this whole dynamic of money, right? And it's a psychological smokescreen. It's just there.
Well, also it's been called a religion, and that sounds like an edge case, but I think, you know,
the thing is that, you know, and they have Sharia law in Islam, and you're not allowed to make money for money.
Yeah,
that's ethical, proper. You know, if it's done in that way, it's compliant with Sharia law.
So one of the aspects, this is sort of like where our road sort of transcends, for example, John Trammell's model, which is simply saying interest is wrong, you know, ban interest and we're all fine. That's not true. I mean, he basically understands what we're saying, I'm sure, but from a formal point of view, is it goes deeper than that. And that is that if money is an article of trade, which Islam supports, right, and that circulates, right, then it's not just making money from money, but it's using money as a tool to influence what you're doing. In other words, the fact that it's subject to supply and everybody needs it for some reason or other, right? Then now you can manipulate people's perception of value by controlling, monopolizing the supply without charging interest, right? And that is sort of also considered in riba. It is also some thought of, and that's kind of interesting that Islam would consider that. But what we're discussing is also transcends Islam in the sense that the notion of money that existed in the time of Islam, that existed in the time of Christ, that existed all up until the 11th century in China and the 15th century in Europe, was that money was basically an asset. It was gold or silver or dates or salt or barley or whatever, and it was a fungible asset. And that means that it had the ability of its subdivisions adding up to the original sum. So if you take a lump of salt and you divide it into 100 equal parts, right? And then you can now, each hundredth of that salt still has all the properties of salt, right? And when you put the 100 parts back together, you get your original lump. And that's assets that are fungible have that property. But for example, a work of art, a painting, you can't divide it into 1,000 pieces and say that each piece is equal. And then, you can't take any piece of a work of art, of any work of art, and put it together and get a work of art again. So
you can create a non-fungible token, it seems.
That's right. That's what a non-fungible token is about. So the fungible and non-fungible aspect is key. But the concept of money at the time of Christ, the time of Muhammad and all that, was basically the monopoly over these assets. But they were actually really assets, and the real assets were being traded. But unbeknownst, or it's sort of indirectly, the moment you start to tax in terms of a favored fungible asset, e.g. gold, the moment you do that, you're implying some kind of universal measure. Because basically you're trying to do what Aristotle posited was the purpose of money, which to measure everything, right? And from the point of view of the math of measure, that doesn't follow. You can't use any fungible asset as a measure of all things. And the simple explanation of that is that an asset can only represent its own value in trade. It cannot represent the value of anything else. And if you're going to use a unit of measure, you have to be representing the value of other things, right?
Can I ask a question about that, Mark, if you don't mind?
Sure.
This is the bit that I'm really, really interested in this. We mentioned agreements earlier.
Can you, before you say that, Liam,
Yeah.
you hold that thought, when you say this is the bit I'm really interested in, can you explain what bit it is you're about to refer to?
Tax.
Right, okay.
So we talked about agreements briefly earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about tax, and Graham's introduced the idea of Sharia law, and you're saying it's not just about interest, which is interesting. And then we talk about tax as an example of money being a measure of all things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the bit that interests me is that the tax function is not just a monetary agreement. Bills, I mean, under the UK Parliament, bills were bills because somewhere in the Middle Ages, kings raised armies, and the earldom would literally raise a bill, and that would be a payment to that earl who would sustain 1,000 men who would fight for the king. Mm-hmm. And that's actually, so there's a connection between money and legislation. But the principle, under the sort of constitutional agreements that we live under, which is, Western liberal parliamentary democracy very broadly, the tax function is a franchise. And the point of a tax function is that it is to recognize everybody's contribution, give them the franchise of one vote, which we have every 5 years, and I find extremely clumsy given the voting possibilities we have in a reality TV scenario, but that's another question. Now, tax being not just a monetary function, I've got my project is about, it relates to tax in a big way. And my question, that I haven't resolved this, is that we are the universal arbiters of value, not money. So somewhere we move beyond this. Let's suddenly move to a system where we've solved this problem. We're in a passive money system.
Okay.
What we need, and we need it now more than ever, but we're struggling to get it. Nurses earn 25,000 a year, footballers earn 25 million. I rest my case as to whether money is an arbiter of value. It's not. I'm supported in that by people as eminent as Mark Carney, who's been the governor of 2 national banks and now is highly regarded in the EU as an economist, whose book said we must return the value function or the function of values to how we value things, which is money. So the question I'm trying to understand is where and how I don't think there's anything wrong with the tax function, because the tax function simply says we all make a contribution, we all have a right to participate. That's parliamentary democracy. That's how we work it now. People represent us, and we influence those decisions by voting. Like it or not, that's how it works. Now, how does that function work in a passive system where actually taxation, I think what you're saying is that taxation, in the sense that we know it, will either not be desirable, possible, or necessary. What does the tax function become?
Well, I mean, the tax function, I mean, tax is an imposition.
No, sorry, just to get the question right. When I say tax function, I mean, now we use tax and that slightly clumsy system to make decisions, to come to agreements. And that's done in a representative democracy. There are direct democratic ways of doing that. But what I'm saying is, what would be an appropriate system for making decisions and coming to agreements in a passive money system?
When we have a passive money system, we're talking about how the money system operates. So changing the money from an active system to a passive system by no means in any way precludes any agreements over goods and services that we all are party or participate to provide. So the dominion or the authority over those goods and services are the people who actually produce them, right? And so they can deal with that, and there's no limit to how they can deal or decide how they're going to use their resources or why. So we can make agreements about how resources are going to be used without having money acting as the pseudo asset intermediary between goods and services and how we use them. So so the question of taxes, I mean, tax is a loaded word in the sense that it's an imposition. It's by law a requirement to you are forced now to collaborate or to give, and it pretty much in its implementation depends on money as it's conceived as the universal asset that everybody respects and pursues. So that's how tax can work in the way we see it today. If you're thinking about taxes as basically a tithe, if you will, over so much wheat or so much that, in other words, the king and the soldiers that defend the community need to eat, need to protect themselves, etc. So we need contributions in building castles and providing the resources they can live and the steel to make their weapons and all that. Well, we can do that simply by giving of our goods and services in the sum as required. So the giving and sharing of goods and services is not dependent uniquely on money per se. So the problem we have with money today and taxes is that we use money as the means to represent all value in order to be able to exact from the community the resources that we need.
Yeah. Right? So just to sort of clarify the point, the way it sounds to me is as if tax under money's misrepresentation is actually kind of an excuse for a degree of authoritarianism that we could really do without, in as much as those decisions are not really being made. And I come back to Graham's point earlier, you know, about how independence came about, or how I forget the other example that he gave, but how can
devolution, not independence.
devolution,
Anyone's
sorry,
yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
that was just, let's not go there.
yeah.
But you know, it's men in smoke-filled rooms again, isn't it? And the question of how do we really do it? We are very much, and most people will tell you this idea of a benevolent dictator is something that a figure like Nigel Farage exploits brilliantly, or Donald Trump, because it's a very popular notion that decisions have to come from one or two, you know, leadership must have leadership. And in actual fact, we have got brilliant information systems, which we've evolved faster than most other systems in the last 30 or 40 years, for making collective decisions. We've got blockchains, we've got digital money, we've got all kinds of forums and abilities to make decisions. And yet we seem to be running a monetary system which includes, you know, where the tax function is actually incredibly clumsy and is really there as a sop to stop people from having to make decisions, because somebody in authority is going to do it for you. It's very, very
well, I mean, I kind of share that view, but I think that one of the important things to think of is how would it work in a passive system in terms of a government. All right. So
that is my question, really.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say you have an entity we call the government, and we say that, and we define the government as, let's say, project managers, right? Who manage projects that any individual entity or company would not want to do for a number of reasons. And it's something that requires some kind of, it's so broad, the interest is so broad, you know, that we need some specialized kinds of people that are going to do that sort of for everybody. That's fine. So we say this entity is going to get elected, you know, and the people who occupy the government are going to get elected because they're going to propose things that we need together and what we need to get done together. And so we're fine on that front. So we vote these people in, and then these people perform a service, and that service is charged for, right? So basically they will say, along with our project to do A, B, and C, right? We need these resources, and we've already put out in our platform that we're going to need those resources, and society voted that. So with those who provide those resources to the government would provide the government, and the government would be just another entity with an account, and they would go negative, right? And then they would say, okay, to test that our plan was really real and that it really was well tuned to the needs of everybody, we will say we will have this other thing where those services that we provided will be marketed, if you will, out to the users, and most specific to the users who most need them, right? And want them, and they, or university, depending on the type of service it is, right? And people will consume those services. So they'll consume the roads, they'll consume the public transport, they'll consume a whole bunch of different things. They'll consume that
public goods in
right?
The current.
And therefore their accounts now would go negative as they consume them, and the government's account would go positive, right? And so it's basically a thing where you produce the goods and services, you produce the government, let's say the national project management service, and then that service goes through providing its goods and services, and then people consume those goods and services over a period of time, and then we start to see whether we're wasting our time or not, because if somebody suddenly government produces something that nobody wants to consume.
Well, there's one question that comes up, Mark, and make it specific, let's take a public good like a road. In accounting terms, you have a system balance, and then you have balances of individual actors in the system.
In a passive system, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, in all systems you have the system balance, but that's the way we check.
So my question is, if you have a public good like a road, bearing in mind we have toll roads now. How do you? I mean, one of the definitions of a public good is that you can provide it as many times, and that doesn't exclude anybody else from using it. It's not excludable, and it's not the other word that's gone out of my head. But we know what public goods are. How do you account? How does each person on a one-to-one basis account for their use of a road, or how does the government account the cost of that road? I mean, we're surely not going to count every individual use of a road on a daily basis.
Well, I mean, if we use a road, we could simply say that there's a toll, and so we have toll, and people pay. But you have to understand that money is no longer an asset. It's not something that we receive and trade. It's simply a record, right? So that.
Well, no, that's my question. My question is, how does the government say, okay, in the accounting system, we've had to build a road from London to Edinburgh. It's called the M1, and at the cost of producing it, this is what it cost. We had to engage all these tar macadam suppliers and hauliers and builders and so on, and it comes to this, and we give it a number of $1 million. What happens when, you see, my understanding of this is that the system balance should be zero, that it should be balancing on both sides. But with a public good, there's an open-ended use that if you have and surely there's a point where the toll road just becomes a public good.
But a toll road become a public good.
You wouldn't enter anything onto the system because it's like air.
Well, no, I mean, you have two things. You have depreciation, you have maintenance, etc. So you never have zero cost of maintaining it, right? So there's an overall cost. There's the initial cost to produce it, which is the biggest sort of effort, and then there's maintenance that adds up to quite a lot over time, and so you have a variable cost for using that service.
Right. But in a passive system, are you saying that cost value equation of the use meeting the cost of provision is better calibrated? I mean, is the idea that should work out to be zero?
No, but you basically have a cost, so that you have people who have received a positive entry in their accounts for providing what's necessary to produce the road, and then you have a negative one, which is what the government, and that's zero, and it doesn't change over time. There's no time function of money. There's no interest. There's nothing. There's just the cost and a provision, right? So the question is it now the hot potato is moved from the providers of the goods and services to the government, who said that this was necessary, and so now they make it available to people, and they said necessary over a period of time, of course, and they said they make it available to people, and people use it. And when they use it, that's when they pay their portion for use. And then that will balance out so that the government now goes back to zero. And so now the people who have used that resource have gone negative. And they compensate that negative by producing other goods and services that they produce to society.
But when you say it will balance, what do you mean? How do we know it will balance? What regulates that? Because their use could be vast, or they could simply never stop using it. It might be unused,
or not use it at all. That's
so how does that balance?
Well, that's a failure in the government's job to provide a service that people really want and need.
Right.
And so
how does the money accounting work on?
Money is kind of really secondary thing. It measures the utility, if you will, of things, meaning the desirability, utility, or the importance that people give to different things. And so if it's a free unit that anybody can deploy to represent their sense of value of what things are, or the value of things, then you have a situation where we can come to a common understanding that it costs so much, and we all know the cost of things, and we can evaluate those costs historically and in the market and relatively and comparatively, and we can agree that makes sense, that assignation of value, And then we can see how many people respond to that. There's a story which it sort of explains this in tangentially, or it actually gets to the root of it, which I put on, which is called Mozart's Town. Did you read that, Graham?
Yeah.
Is which document's that in?
It's Mozart's Town. It's in bibocurrency.
I've not read that yet.
So it's kind of interesting because basically the actual argument was response to Michel Bowens, who basically said that money was always going to be a tool of power, and no matter what, and that I was answering several points of his there, and giving an example of how from a systems point of view, you can have a stable system in which people value things. So the idea was very simple, was that, everybody in a town, in a small town, have, in order to live and have a comfortable living or a certain standard of living, the average amount of time that people have to invest is 20 hours a week, right? So with 20 hours a week between different types of services, plumbing, electricity, building, all the things that you need to live, garbage collecting, all of that stuff. The whole thing was that with on average 20 hours per week per person, the town is humming, right? And they have everything they need. They have the food, and they're happy, and they're living like this. But they have a capacity to work 60 hours a week if they want to, right? So Mozart comes to this town, and he has no time to spend doing any of the plumbing or electricity and all that, because he's a madman. He wants to play music, and he's a damn genius. He's a divine genius. So so he decides he's going to spend all his time producing music. So he produces a concert every week, right? So now he says, okay, I'm going to put up my concert, and I'm going to see how many hours people pledge to my concert, right? So in order to meet his needs, right, of 20 hours a week of equivalent value, people are going to have to go to the concert at basically pledging the corresponding amount of time in their different fields, right? So if people go to the concert and love his concerts, and they pay with their time, right? So now they used to work 20 hours a week each, but now they're all working, let's say if there are 100 people, that's they're working, 20.5 hours a week to maintain Mozart's 20 hours of menial tasks, so that he can produce this music that everybody loves, right? So everybody's basically incorporated the value of Mozart on the basis of their value, right? Because they love his music, right? And so I give an example with a very simple computation of how that would work with Mozart and not work with Salieri, because of the population of the town and the need for Salieri to now, tour the world to be able to get enough money just to pay his living in that town. So the basic idea there is
how would 99 other Mozarts meet their needs if nobody went to their concerts because they didn't like them?
Well, that's a problem, because if in order to you produce music, right, for other people to enjoy, and you're going to be consuming other people's time and effort in things that are, let's say, more mundane or whatever, but necessary, right? Then you better entertain them. You better do something that they like. And the gamble is on you to produce something, to do both things, do the things people like, at the same time doing things that transcend, today's vision and will be loved in the future too, whatever.
When Liam knows this, but I sent your website to several people that I know, and some of them, they'll read the first paragraph, and then without immediately something triggers, and they come back and say, well, we need money to motivate people to do things. And so, okay, you haven't read it, you haven't thought about it, you haven't, there's something in this that triggers that. And I am wanting, for me personally, to find a way to what is life like when a new money system is there? So I'm living in this town. I've got 3 choices of different supermarkets to go to. What is life like? There's other banks. What happens with the banks? I know what I like to do. I like to have these kind of conversations. I like to explore. I like to be involved in education situations. So how is my life different? Imagining that this, as you say, this money is represented properly. A day in the life of, for example.
Yeah. Well, that was the intent, because the discussion about what happens, I mean, there's a reality here, and that is we live in a community and we need to satisfy each other's needs. So I was just giving you an example of the case whereby somebody who does something that is not a menial task or whatever, or sort of would be made affordable by people increasing their output to cover their needs because they value them. Now, the criteria of why people value certain things and other things, that's a thing that we cannot control with money, and we should never try to. Well, in fact, with the current money system, we are using money to fabricate opinion, to fabricate trends, etc. So it's very hard to even compare what we're talking about in a passive system with what's going on in this system. It's kind of very dangerous to use examples from this system to see, because a lot of the problems that we have here just disappear when you make money passive. But I think the key important motivation to our work is to recognize, first point is that we're operating on something we don't understand, and even the experts don't understand. Money has not been defined, and therefore they cannot understand. They're pretending to understand what they cannot understand because they haven't done their homework. And that is, they haven't defined the system that they're operating in a way that it can be understood for them or anyone.
Yeah.
But so there's pretense there. That's number.
So on that note, I have heard somebody in the EU Parliament stand up and explain, you guys don't understand banking, and that bankers don't understand banking, and that,
But it's not just banking. It's not understanding money. And so, and most of the people who criticize the banking system, don't even do that properly. So it's always kind of an emotive response to something evil, if we'll put that label, right? And that emotive response makes them feel right by criticizing, and therefore the criticism somehow is legitimate. That's wrong. You have to really understand what you're talking about at a fundamental level, and no one does, because it's not available for anyone to understand. It's no one's fault, really. It's the fact that we assume that money is this thing that we have to live with, yes and yes, without realizing that it's up to us to define it. So it hasn't been defined. And so that's the first point. And the second point is that it's unequivocally true that our current understanding, or a common notion of money that we're operating on in lieu of a proper formal definition, is logically inconsistent. These are facts. So we don't have to worry about what will happen in the future if we change the system. What we have to worry about is we're living in a bullshit paradigm, and we have to clarify the paradigm. That is, if that's not understood on the first page, right, then there's no way of getting back to it by trying to compare what the world would be like if it's because under the assumption is that if we compare what the world would be like, right, if we did that to decide if we're going to go there, right, by correcting these errors, right, we are sort of we are implicitly saying that what we're doing now is somehow legitimate. It's, it has a kind of legitimate reason to exist. We're doing this because the world where we would go if we corrected this is not desirable. But that doesn't make any sense. It's fucking wrong. And I don't know any paradigm where something wrong turns out to be right somehow.
So is there any other example of something else apart from money in the history of humanity where there's something similar? Well, ultimately, there's agreements that have been taking place over thousands of years. They evolve, we grow into it, we pick up the rules of the old game and we play it, and that's it. And then someone says, well, hang on a minute. As Liam said yesterday, it's the emperor's new clothes. Hang on, this isn't right. And then people say, shut up.
The sun revolving around the earth.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that was I think
they don't have the
history is poor, but I think that was a general assumption, wasn't it? Or belief.
With a difference, because the whole problem of Earth-centric universe, the whole problem with that was it's a mistake to believe that, and there are consequences of that mistake. But no matter whether we're believing the truth or a lie, it doesn't change our day-to-day reality, right? So we still have the sun coming up in the morning for our intents and purposes. Everything seems to work the same for us on it. But the money system is a misrepresentation that goes right into the everyday life of everybody and modifies.
Well, maybe to answer Graham's question, then a better example would be an assumption like about a medicine that was actively damaging that we were, habitually applying and killing ourselves with. I think there are those examples. You'd have to, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but
So there's I mean, for me, there's the technical understanding, and then there's the psychological understanding.
Yeah.
And these two are for me, the technical side is going to take me time because I don't naturally adapt to it. But when it comes to I'm just fascinated by even exploring the subject with people and how they respond and how they, there's a guy I know, not Michel, his name is Peter Koenig, who he's in Switzerland. He's researched. He knows Michel Bauwens quite well. He lives in Switzerland. He's in his 70s, and he's researched money for 30, 40 years. I'd be fascinated to hear him in a conversation with you, Mark. I'm going to send this to him because he's been doing workshops and he goes to the psychology of it, and has done a lot of work on it. And as he says, it's fascinating the different beliefs we have about money, what it is and what it isn't in terms of belief. Not actually what it is. He doesn't define it.
I know he doesn't define it, but here's the point. This is something that anybody with or without technical background can grasp.
Mm.
And it's a very simple concept, right? The first point, money isn't something that exists in and of itself. We agree with that. It's something that we have generated. It's a concept idea we've generated. Therefore, it's incumbent on us to define it in order to use that artifice, right? To use that artifice in conjunction with a world that wasn't defined by us. That's the physical world, the real world, right? The thing that gives us food, water, sustenance, right? So we have to, if we're going to use that thing we invented in conjunction, then we have to have some kind of definition of that artifice, which is an abstract artifice, right? That relates to it. So that's a formal requirement. What's the relationship between this dollar sign or euro sign and the real world? That's got to be written in a way that is unequivocal and understood by everybody. We can find newer and better definitions as we go along, but whatever definitions we have has to be transparent, open. Everybody's got to understand it and have it available to them. It's like open software, right? We don't have that. And not only do we not have that, the experts don't have that. So we have the anomaly with respect to the pseudoscience of economics, where you'll have Hayek versus Keynes, right? And you won't realize that you cannot evaluate the two because there's no common framework to evaluate economic theories. So if you read Hayek, you have to adopt Hayek's framework. And if you read Keynes, you have to adopt Keynes' framework. But there's no common framework. So it's a waste of time. It's just theories that are just popped up because somebody has some kind of ancillary kind of credibility that allows people to listen to them more than someone else. It's just nonsense.
Yeah. And it's this thing, so that logical argument completely makes sense to me.
You can understand where's the fucking definition. I'm no expert, but if you give me a definition, a formal definition that you're going to decide, and the thing is that the formal definition, we go through this in the MSTA, and we have one thing which talks about the introduction to the MSTA, and we have sort of like a tongue-in-cheek kind of decision map, right? So we say, okay, is the idea of money in your head, do you think it's logical or illogical? So nobody's even thought about that. They have an idea in their head, but they never thought about whether it's logical or not, right? And they say, well, if you say that if it's not logical, right, then come and join us in the MSTA, because we're going to try and find a logical definition of money, right? Right? But if you think it is logical, okay, great. Go to the next question. So the next question is, you think it's logical. Next question is that logical idea you have in your head common to everybody else? Because everybody having their own logical understanding of money is not enough. It's got to be a common understanding, right? And they can say, well, yeah, somebody will say, yeah, it's logical, and yeah, it's the same thing everybody else has, right? But if you say, I don't know, then you come back to the MSTA. So you have a logical understanding of money, and now you say, you don't know if it's everybody else's, so let's come down, because we want a logical and common understanding of money. And then, but if the guy insists, no, my idea of money is logical, and it's what everybody has in their mind, you say, okay, how do you prove that? Where has it been published and ratified? There's nowhere where it's been published and ratified. There is no organism that said, money is this. The only thing, the best you have from the economic community is money is money. It's always circular. The dollar, well, the dollar's the dollar. Or they'll use other terms. They'll say it's legal tender. And what's legal tender? Money. So you just get them in circles.
And it's basically that if any contract by law has objects which neither party do understand, then those contracts are not valid.
That is the logical conclusion.
Which means that all contracts nowadays, the whole thing is invalid. The whole system.
The power is, but that doesn't mean we have to throw it all out, because there's a lot of stuff that people have been doing, that have what's called in law consideration, right? The problem is the money aspect. So we don't have to, we can solve that problem by making money, right, well defined. And then that would automatically correct all of these contracts. So we could continue. It would correct our behavior from the point of correction onwards.
So so on that note, tomorrow it's been passed. Amazing.
Yeah.
That's it. It's been represented properly. How does my life change, and how am I going to behave differently?
Well, first of all, you now can negotiate anything without any intermediaries with anybody else. You're basically able to make relationships with other people and quantify them according to each other. As long as you use the common standard to reference of money as a common measure, then you do any transaction with anybody at any time, and that would be recorded, right? Mm-hmm. But there's another document which is which came out of a very detailed discussion I had with Michael Haynes from Australia, that is a co-author with a World Bank author. And, he was stuck in the problem with, okay, you're right, the money's not defined, but we have to do it that way, and I'm saying, no, we don't have to. And so he kept on trying to demand that our solution satisfy the problems that arise with the system as it is now, which is, again, circular. That document explains a lot of what you're asking.
Where is that document?
It's again on bibocurrency in articles, the way it could be.
Okay, so I found Mozart's Town and the way it could be. Okay.
So in relation to your answer directly, Mark, your answer said that there would be, you can interact, you can trade with anybody you choose to. There's no intermediary.
No financial.
What Graham is doing is he's producing arms and selling them to Russia. Currently, our government has a restriction on that, and he can't do it. So does that change?
No, we can decide collectively.
So doesn't that revise the answer? Because actually, we need intermediary. We need some.
No, but it's not financial.
It's not all be completely free,
But it's not. It's not financial intermediary. In other words, the intermediation is not a financial one.
Right.
It's a moral logic. We've all decided to live in society according to certain morals, and therefore we're not going to allow slave trade.
So more simply, I think all you're saying is Graham doesn't need a balance of X in order to interact or trade with.
That's right. All he needs to do is to be able to have something that other people want, to be able to justify his existence.
Okay, that's slightly different.
In other words, the way I look at it from the point of children, I say I feel safe in a passive money system because I know that if my kids need to justify their existence or to, all they have to do is be willing to interact. And they can pursue anything they need, but it's going to be motivated by different motivations. It's not going to be financial, because in a world where money is not the decision maker, it's not the enabling token, which it is today. It's just a record of whatever we did, and a stable record. In that world, what makes you valuable to others is what you actually do. And whether people, and whether you make that you're satisfying other people's needs.
I still worry for people who either in their perception or other people's perceptions are not seen as, or in fact not valuable to other people. Because
no, everybody's valuable. I mean, and let's put it this way: the greatest scientist in the world, probably because he ventured into whatever, he still had to teach to make a living. So he was good at what he was doing in the real world, but then on the side he developed this great theory. So the point is that you have to be able to do something to collaborate. But I think here's a very good important, Graham, and I'll put it in a context that I think that you understand in Spain, right?
Yeah.
This is the movement I would like to see happen, which is called, no, it doesn't exist. It's just in the embryo stage, right? So CCT is Casa, Comida, Tiempo, which is house, food, and time. So house food is sort of like a general label for all the basic things that we need, right? Okay. So the politics of CCT or FHT or food house or HFT is very simple. We calculate the amount of time it takes, the amount of effort on the population to guarantee the most robust, high quality, nutritive food, right? The best practical, and useful and comfortable, if you like, housing, right? And all of the other basic amenities we need to survive, right? We calculate the time it takes for us to produce that, right? And then we subtract that from the time we have available. So the objective of this policy is to reduce the amount of time to basically guarantee everybody a robust, launching pad for their lives, so they have good food, they have basic housing, all that, and maximize the amount of free time for them to manage for themselves. So an economy that would run on that would have two basic principles. One is that everybody would be healthy, and they would achieve that health with a minimum, and I calculate 18 to 20 hours a week is what it would cost for Spaniards in Spain to guarantee their whole horticulture, primary, then secondary foods, wine, cheeses, all this great culture they have of how to live in a very world-renowned diet, right? And have that available to everybody, right? And then basic housing, right, would be 18 to 20 hours on average for everybody. So people are working 35, 45, and in reality, they're working 50, 60 hours a week just so they can compete against other people to keep a job, right? So all of that other time that they're working, now they dedicate to what they love. So everybody's guaranteed the basic needs that they want, and everybody's doing what they love. That economy would become unbeatable on the world scale, because you would be producing the best of the best in all of those different fields, right? So that is the policy we want. So where we go is we go to the political class and the ruling class, whatever you want to call them, and we say to them, we the people want this, right? And we want to calculate it in real resources, time. We don't want to calculate in your money, your funny money stuff. This is the amount of time we want to be able to invest to guarantee a standard of living that would guarantee our kids to have a healthy and wholesome life, right? And then we want to have freedom to choose what we do with our time and not have that be determined by your funny money. And so the only response against what we're saying, because ours is all based on real resources. We know the history of Spain. We know what people, I've worked in agriculture in Spain, selling agricultural products for many years on an international level of a Spanish company internationally. So I know about pretty much the whole life cycle of what it takes to produce things. The famous Almeria in the south of that has, you know, produces so much horticulture. So I know what it takes and what's possible, and I know what people know, and what people know on the ground is tremendous. I don't think there's any minister of agriculture that knows as much as most basic agronomists that have been working in the field know about how to do things and how to keep things going. And they're a pretty honest bunch too. So we leave it up to them to produce as much as possible. Anybody who's got an acre here, an acre there, we want them to produce. That is going to be like, you know, being a food producer is going to be like being a doctor or a, you know,
professional footballer,
space engineer, whatever, or any highly valued person. And so these people are going to be left to their devices to produce and to maintain the markets, which are now at risk. I know you're familiar, Graham, here, but like I'm watching over 30 years how the, you know, it's still robust, but then the quantity of local produce is diminishing, and it's being, you know, infiltrated by products from all over the world, which is a problem. But the mercadillos, right, which we have several days a week, and where we buy our vegetables, you know, we seek out the local produce as much as possible. So basically what we do is foment local production of food and basic needs and housing, etc., and then minimize that time, right? And then maximize the freedom that people have with the rest of their time. That is the policy. And the only argument they have against that, because it's absolutely doable, right? Depending on where you are, it'll be to one level or whatever level of standard of living, depending on what resources are available, but it's possible everywhere to achieve and to optimize. So the only argument is, oh, we you know, but the, you know, it's not economically feasible. At which we have the perfect answer. We say, well, that's fine. You're an economist, you do econometrics, we respect that, that's great. But until you can give us a definition of the unit you're doing all this econometrics in, right, and share that with us, you know, you're pretty outside of the conversation. You just don't count, you know, get lost. And I don't care who they are, the governor of the Bank of Canada or representative of the IMF or the World Bank, I don't care. If you haven't done your homework on that respect and you're trying to impose these imperatives and constraints on the real world based on something you haven't even done your homework and defined, you know, I'm sorry, you're not in the conversation, and we're not going to allow that our freedom to live and to sustain a wholesome existence be, you know, be diminished by your imperatives.
Well, presumably you're not really going to need as much expertise in terms of money because it's a more benign entity of record, and it's not treated as the capital good that it shouldn't be. Mark Carney from this discussion, because he ought to be in it. I think he wants to be.
But that's the second point.
The book demonstrates that actually you're right. He doesn't have he doesn't understand money as a systemic. So in order to bring him into the conversation, you know, we can also reassure him that there are many, many other things he might. I mean, you know, he's a pretty good writer. There's lots of other stuff he can do.
That's great, but I think the point I'm making is the first point is that we're not going to allow that to impose or limit our ability to live. But the second point is we know how to account for resources. And I'll give you a very simple example. I've worked on several European projects. I've directed at least parts of or segments of different projects. And I've directed government-funded projects in Spain, right? Run them from the top down. And what do we all do? What do we all do? We account for the project in terms of man hours. We basically account for what's needed to do the project, correct? Then, when we've decided what we need, right? Right, then we calculate the cost in the standard price of all those different resources, right? And we see if it meets the budget. And if it doesn't meet the budget, then what we do is we compromise the project.
Absolutely. This is because that's why people who control money make executive decisions where they should not. All the time. All the time.
Exactly. So the point I'm trying to make is that the practice of accounting for resources in order to do projects is standard. Right, and we know how to do that, and we know how to do that in a stable fashion. So we do not need we do not need the impositions of these other criteria, financial criteria, that have nothing to do or have no proven link to reality, right?
Graham
to
asked me,
impose on that, which is the message I'm trying to make to
you're
Graham.
making it perfectly well. Graham made in a side conversation that he and I had, I think Graham, you asked about examples of money imperative. You said, "What's the story?" I think in one of our conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was to do with you're saying that the doctors, GPs in the UK are saying this is a mess. We're not being paid. This is, you get 5 pence or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think I was just offering that as one example amongst many of money imperatives being the decision-making driver and not the simple requirement or driver that GPs would like to have, which is that, well, you queried whether their role was to keep us healthy. No, that's probably our job. But actually to diagnose when we are sick, that most definitely is a GP's job, and a dentist's job is to keep our teeth healthy. And the fact that they're being paid way below the market value, is a money imperative.
I was thinking about my dad's care. My dad had Alzheimer's and he was in a care home, and the amount of turnover that care homes have due to it being a very hard job, not extremely well paid. And I'm just thinking, am I wrong in thinking that in this new system, then it's like people do things because they need done. So we need to look after our elders. We need to do it. But at the moment, the way that things are, if we didn't have these care homes and those people, this is Scotland I'm talking about, not the Mediterranean cultures tend to look after their elders differently as do other cultures. But in terms of certainly Scotland, if those care homes didn't exist, there's no ability to look after our elders. It would so radically change the way. And so I'm wondering if that's even useful as a thought experiment to start thinking like that, or is it just, as you say, Mark, we start with the logic, it doesn't work. Okay, then what? And then looking at all these things, and then from there, we have to work forward rather than trying to appeal to create some utopia. And then people say, oh, that's not possible. And then they give up.
It's not as if the status quo we have now is not producing an impossible scenario. I mean, if you look at Stop World War III, which in the articles, I try to make these as brief as possible so they're accessible.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, the situation in the United States, for example, and it's the same in Spain. It's just not so acute. But the problem is that basically we have now going to 35 trillions, and that's only a few months since I wrote that piece. It's gone from 33 to 35 trillion. National debt means that there's a debt of 125 per capita. It means that a household of 4 people has between 400 and 500,000 debt on their backs. So under the system as we know it today, the only way to deal with that kind of problem is through inflation. And at the rate of inflation at such a steep rate of growth of debt, the rate of inflation is not something we choose. It's something that we have to let float, which would be devastating to the economy in terms of instability. So we have a devastatingly untenable system existing now. So it's not a question of saying, tell us if what you're going to do is better than now. The question is, what we have now is impossible already. And then the other thing is that we have identified these fundamental problems. So we can't just skip those problems. We can't just say, no, well, we forget about defining things, but that'll make life easier. No, it won't make life easier. And we have to define and we have to put things in their context so that things can be placed in their appropriate priority. And that is what we need to do. And the way to do that is the CCT idea. Saying, look, we can produce all the food here in Spain so that everybody lives, like an enviable existence compared to standard of living, right? Eating really, really well, et cetera. And it's going to only take 20 hours a week max. I figure it might be more or less, I don't know. hopefully less. We could probably even make it shorter than that just by being smart about things. So we basically can guarantee everybody a great standard of living, and all that, with just operating on the resources we have now, as long as nobody messes with us. And we will not accept these phony economic imperatives that are imposed as if they are vital requirements. They're not vital requirements. They don't belong to the vital world. So the money system either adapts to reality or it's gone. None of this thing that money becomes the reality. And that's really what we're changing. And we're doing this in a world where we still have fairly good standard of living. We still have, social cohesion. We still have the ability of interacting, positively, but that's soon to be lost. All it's going to take is to have nuclear bombs flying between Russia and the rest of the world for that to collapse, and then the opportunity will be gone. All we'll have left when that happens is to say what got us into this mess was wrong, and so we can make that right to get out of this mess, perhaps. But we have to act soon and say, otherwise, eventually, chaos promoting practices lead to chaos, and when you're in chaos, it's very hard to do anything. So our motive is very simple. This is wrong, and we know it's wrong, and don't weasel out. Deal with it, right? And when it's not a party issue, it's not a social, it's not, it's not a racial, it's not an ethnic, it's not a religious issue. It's a simple, logical practice issue.
But that is a problem in terms of motivators, isn't it, Mark? And that short list that you just gave of it's not any of those issues. Unfortunately, in the attention economy, those are the things that get attention.
I know. That is a problem.
And that's what I've been talking to Graham about. I think that's where there's an intersection here of different abilities, and there has to be some deployment of an ability to make this an issue.
See that conversation I had with Mark Heffernan?
I did. I haven't seen all of it. I actually watched it.
So Graham,
is that on YouTube, Mark? Is it?
Yeah. And it was what we did is that Isaiah 55 1 has a statement that says, "All ye who thirst, come to the waters, and all ye who have no money, come buy and eat." And I thought that was really interesting because it's Old Testament and it's in the Abrahamic tradition, so that it's pertinent to Christians, Jews, and Muslims, right? And here's the prophecy Isaiah saying that there's a way to buy and eat without money. And that, I thought, was something for people to think of.
Yeah, but how does that relate to making this an issue for people?
Well, it's simply that when you tell that to those believers who will only act within the mark of their religious beliefs, you're giving them an in to what you're talking about in money that is actually supported somehow, or potentially supported by what their prophets say.
Well, it's nice to meet you, Mark, and I'm going to keep reading. Where was that? Could you send that link to the conversation you just referred to? I mean, just to say thank you for your time, both of you. I've arrived at the party going, okay, hello, where's the bathroom? Where's the upstairs toilet? All of this stuff. And I'm just, for me, it's fascinating in understanding the bigger picture and what works.
May I suggest something? If you're interested.
Please, Mark. Yeah.
I would like to get this stuff with different people, right? And not just myself talking, right? So so I have this stuff. Would you be interested in doing segments together where we go?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm happy to, for me to record these and say, listen, I'm just a guy, I'm above average intelligence. I'm not an economist. I'm not a mathematician, none of these things. But I am genuinely interested in the disparity and the unfairness in this world and want justice. So, yeah.
The idea is to get more and more people to make this knowledge theirs, right? Because that's the key. Because what has to move this change is the knowledge, not the personalities. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. It has to be
It's got to be something that everybody goes, oh, I see it, I see it, I see it. And when that happens, it's game over.
And it has to be like, you know, someone saying, look at this apple in my hand, and someone saying, hang on, you're not a gardener, you can't talk about apples. So it's
Actually,
like,
Graham,
you know.
that's what Mark's just described as your Jimmy protocol.
So
Anyway,
just to briefly end on that, Mark, the Jimmy protocol is a thing that I've had for years. It's like, I grew up in Glasgow in Scotland. I grew up in bars, and a lot of my education was in bars, with men in bars, and there's always a Jimmy who drinks a pint very slowly, very quietly, and he's a reader. You know, he's 60. He's read all his life. He knows everything about this and that, and he remembers it all. And he's streetwise. And then you start talking. He goes, "Hang on, I've got no idea what you're fucking talking about, pal. Do you mean do that?" And then that happens. You go, "Yeah. Oh, why didn't you say that?" So he's very. There are people like that everywhere.
that's right.
That's the kind of guy I want to be able to say. So basically, he goes, "Okay, following you that. Aye, very good." That's what I want to get to.
Yeah. And I think we will.
AI, Jimmy.
In other words, the criteria for expertise in economics is not that out of reach for the vast majority of people. It takes a little bit of effort at the beginning, but once you get it, you start developing on your own. You start, because you just look around and you go,
and you start to see things everywhere. It's very much like, I'm involved in a similar process with a friend around the thought experiment of social computing. Like, you put people in, we design things, it's engineering. Society doesn't work. Clearly, it doesn't work. It's a bad design. It's a bad computation. Therefore, we have to change the computation.
Yes.
How do we do that? We all have to do it. Can't be just those few doing it. We all have to do it. So it's, once you start thinking about it, it starts to change the way the neurons connect, I think. Great, Mark. Great, Liam. I'll be in touch.
Thank you very much for this
Thank
opportunity.
you.
Let me know if you have a copy of this available.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Recording,
definitely.
right?
Great.
And if you want to put it online, feel free.
Will do. All right.
Okay, take care,
Cheers,
guys. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.